Hey there, Dan Kent here, and I think this is our fifth episode of Dan Kent Can Read. And this week I'm going to look at Johann Hari's book, Lost Connections, Why You're Depressed and How to Find Hope. This is a fantastic book. It's so well done. Basically, it's a book about depression. And in this book, Johann sort of starts off by kind of documenting his own experience with depression and kind of what he did about it. And he went and saw a mental health professional, a doctor, and he kind of heard the common narrative, which is that depression is caused by some deficiency in the brain. A lot of times it's caused by, a poor serotonin activity in your brain. And so the solution is to take antidepressants so that you can improve your serotonin function in your brain. And so he accepted this narrative. He took the antidepressants and he experienced an initial boost in his mood, along with some side effects, but an improved mood as well. However, the improvement in his mood, it did not last very long. It started to decay. And so he went back in to see his doctor and he was given a med adjustment, which is more meds basically. And he did this multiple times until at some point he's like, okay, wait a minute, this is not sustainable. And so he started to look into what is really going on here. Is this narrative true that depression is caused by a deficiency in the brain? And he started looking at the research and he found a lot of flaws with the whole kind of narrative, both that depression is caused by a deficiency in the brain and also that antidepressants are the most effective kind of antidote or most effective prescription to take care of this problem. And so, for instance, he looks at a lot of science in here and he talks to a lot of researchers, and one of the studies that he documents looks at the positive effect of antidepressants on mood using what's called the Hamilton scale, which is a 0 to 50 sort of scale. And what he found is that most people, when they take antidepressants, will have an initial positive kind of response to their antidepressants of 1.6 Hamilton points. So about a 4% improvement in mood. To give you some perspective on that, the researchers also found that if you improve your sleep quality, you can get a 6-point improvement in mood. So a 12% improvement with only positive side effects, whereas the antidepressants a lot of times have a lot of negative side effects. And he also looks at sort of the shady rise of antidepressants and a lot of the corporate shenanigans that went on in order to get these companies to be able to prescribe so many of these medications to so many people, and a lot of the FDA loopholes that these companies kind of push their research through, and just the shady studies themselves and things like that. And but Johann also talks about what's called the grief exception. And when I first went into mental health, and I was in mental health working with depressed and suicidal people and psychotic people for over 20 years, I did that. And one of the first things I noticed is that the DSM had what was called a grief exception. And basically what that is a doctor, when they diagnose you, they will look at your symptoms and they'll say, this is what I think is causing the symptoms. If you've ever seen the show House, the whole show is practically diagnosing, and they do what's called differential diagnosis, which is you look at the symptoms and you say, what are all the possible things it could be? And in the show House, of course, there's all these wacky possible things that these symptoms could mean. And then House comes in and says, no, this is what it actually is. And he ends up being right. What's fascinating is that in mental health, when you have depression symptoms, there's only one differential option, and that is grief. So you're either depressed or you're experiencing grief. And so if you're experiencing grief, they might not prescribe you the medications. Well, that causes certain questions about depression right away. If there are these external environmental reasons that could cause me to have these depression symptoms, why is grief the only possibility? There could be all sorts of things that could be causing these symptoms. And that's really sort of what Johann's book is about, is what are some other possible sources or causes of these depression symptoms? And Johann looks at 9 potential forces that compel these symptoms. He calls them disconnections. And he looks at these 9. He could look at a lot more for sure, but he looks at 9 mostly because there's a lot of research around these, I think. And so I'm not going to, share the punchline on all of these, because if you're interested in this, I really want you to read the book, because I want you to experience how Johann goes through each one of these. But the first one that I'll share is that he talks about one of the disconnections that we are experiencing is a disconnection from meaningful work. Right now, only about 13% of the people in the world feel any type of fulfillment from the job that they do. And those statistics are just going to get worse with automation and so forth. Another disconnection that he talks about is disconnection from nature. We evolved in a certain natural environment, and we feel most comfortable, and there's something very important to us to be in touch with nature. But with technology and with putting concrete on everything and all the buildings and all of that stuff, we are kind of imperceptibly increasingly becoming separated from nature. We look, if you're in the city like me, you go outside at night, you look at the stars, and you see maybe 5 or 6 stars. We should see tens of thousands of stars, but because of light pollution, we can't. And so we're just progressively disconnected from nature. And it totally smotes something inside of us when we're disconnected like that, and when we're in this artificial sort of realm. I actually gave a sermon a couple years ago called A Walk on the Wild Side that kind of talked about the spiritual impact of being disconnected from nature. And I share a lot of the same research that Johann kind of looks at as well. He shares 7 other disconnections, but in light of that, in light of all of this science about all these other causes of depression, I would hope that the medical community would maybe broaden their differential diagnosis and maybe kind of make their diagnostic criteria more complex. But no, instead, what they did is they got rid of the grief exception altogether. Now the only diagnostic option that's available is depression. In my 20 years working in mental health, I've worked with thousands of patients who are depressed and suicidal, and I've spent thousands of hours sitting on one-to-ones with patients who are suicidal to keep them safe. And in the process of this, I had a lot of the same intuitions that Johann had about depression. And I have a stack of research that I have for a book that I was working on. And Johann ended up writing my book. He ended up writing my book, and you know what? He also wrote it better than I would have written it. I mean, it really is. It's a really well done book, and I encourage you to read it if this interests you. At the basis of why I like this book so much is that Johann and I share this common kind of assumption, and that assumption is that our depression is an alert. It's there for a reason. We have to listen to it. It's there to tell us that something's wrong and we need to take action. We shouldn't unplug the alarm. We should listen to the alarm, and we should work with the alarm. And when we unplug the alarm instead, our coping skills atrophy, and our ability to kind of resolve our problems tends to atrophy. And this book is a really good first step in getting control back over our mood. I wish you would have looked at the role of food in our moods. There's a lot of research on showing how a plant-based diet, eating plenty of fruits and vegetables and greens can be really, really helpful for mood. And the other thing that I would have liked to have seen, and I guess it wouldn't have made any sense because he confesses, and I appreciate this, he confesses that he's an atheist. And so, he does a good job of looking at how we have to broaden our perspective on depression. Depression is more than just biochemical kind of deficiencies. There's also this psychosocial dimension. And I think that someone, maybe me, should also talk about the next level out, which is a spiritual basis for depression. Because, for instance, he talks about how we are disconnected from purposeful work, but I think we're also disconnected from meaning. Purpose is great, But I think we also hunger for meaning, and we can only have that meaning if we have faith in God, because by definition, you need to believe in God to have meaning. Uh, well, I'm out of time, but let me just say that this is a fantastic book. I highly encourage you to read it if this topic interests you. And let me know if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, cries of heresy. See you next time.